Hey guys, Wolfie here. This is going to be a video log, and it is a The City of Final Fantasy Opera Amiel related. This is going to be the 12th of July, 2020, and the reason why it's a video log is it's an actual fun thing I want to share with you guys, and this is from personal observation on the global end. And what I want to go into for this particular video log is just me talking, and I'm going to go into certain characters who I want to point as marker units. The reason why I refer to certain units in the game thus far on global as marker units is because they're tied to either a lost chapter, main story, ultimate trial, or even the whole any aspect of the game where there's something about them, whether it be awakening or rework or whatever have you, is tied to something that's either close to an end of one era in the game, or the start of a new era, if that makes any sense. So there are some characters, I just want to go into, and again, this is based on personal observation of sorts. So, again, some of these characters are, they're either part of the main story, or their debut was it through a character event, but these characters I do feel are marker characters because they're a part of either something that's about to come to global soon as the start of something new, or the end of something prior, era-wise. So, with that, this is a bit of my opinion only, but it's going to be some degree of evidence behind it, so I will have in the description below the link to the Dissidia database website, and I will apologize in advance because I will be doing a lot of pausing, throughout, and that way I can get certain characters that I want on the screen, so you don't see me do all the things, while I'm recording. That way I could do a little bit of editing of my own, so I will be back and we'll meet you all at the home screen. I am back, so I was thinking about this a little bit, so I chose to not go meet you guys at the home screen, but point out one particular unit here that is a marker character in my opinion, and that is Freya from Final Fantasy IX. Now, the reason why I put her here as a marker character is that when she debuted as a part of Act 2, Chapter 3, believe it or not, it was the start of the Cosmos era. Now, on JP, the Cosmos era lasted a little bit longer than it did on Global, but the fact that she came along around the Cosmos era, and because of that, she is a character who I do feel is a marker character, because when she came along, it was right around the beginning of the Cosmos difficulty era. So, I'll be doing a lot of pausing, so don't mind me. Now, Keishi here, that's how I pronounce it, so the K part is actually the correct pronunciation, but Keishi is another marker character in my personal opinion, because you're talking about the interlude for the main story that bridges Act 1 to Act 2. And for him, when it came to character debuts on the main story side, for interlude, it was the point where you only had one character coming along instead of the usual 3 to 5 throughout Act 1. So, when it came down to interlude before Act 2, it was just one character. And for Keishi, he was the lone character for the interlude, which is part of the main story. And he is a marker character because that was the first in that type of trend, which still goes on to this day on JP, where it's whenever comes to certain parts of the main story, it was just, since interlude, that it was just one character being recruited per chapter, whether it be part 1 or part 2 as of late for JP, or just the single chapter itself. So for interlude, even up to Act 3, Chapter 1, Part 2, it's just one character. So, again, like I said, he is a marker character because it's a single character per main chapter story, so that's that on that. Lidless set from Final Fantasy XI she is a marker character in my opinion, because I do have to double check, but she's part, let me double check. So I do have to pause, so I'll be back. Because I have to double check something here. Okay, I did a quick trip, so fortunately I was right. The fact that the banner that she's on, in the sense of, not banner, I can't even English right now, But anyway, she is a dual-purpose marker character, meaning that when she first made her debut at Act 1, Chapter 11, that was the final chapter where, in the main story of the game, where you had at least 3 characters you could recruit. And that's not all with Lilith set. So she will be coming back as a synergy for Act 2, Chapter 11, Part 1. You notice how I kind of put that there on purpose. And the reason why that is that when it comes to Act 2, Chapter 11, Part 1, you get to a point in the main story where the main story itself is split into at least 2 parts. You have your Act 2, Chapter 11, Part 1, and you have your Act 2, Chapter 11, Part 2. So, looks like the main story is going to be split into 2 parts. And Lilith's set is part of the whole banner where it's Act 2, Chapter 11, Part 1, alongside a new character coming up, and then the Final Fantasy 15 antagonist, Arden, and Maria. And the thing is, with Maria, I could include her here, but just for the sake of the video, I'm going to hold off on her for a little while. So Maria will be a part of it, but for a different reason. And that reason is on top of the fact that Maria and Lilith said are part of synergy for Act 2, Chapter 11, Part 1 with Arden. So Maria will be a part of it, but for I'm going to bring up something unique with her. Radio for Final Fantasy IV. For those of you who know me well, she is one of my homegirls, and when it comes to the female characters from the franchise, she is in my top 5 for all-time favorites. Now, what's so special about her is she is a character event unit. Why is she on this list? Well, the thing is, when it came down to her 1660 Awakening, she was the very last. And regarding the JP and global aspect of her debut, she debuted on global sooner than when she debuted on JP. But the fact still remains, she was the last character, the last lost chapter to get her 6060 Awakening, because the next lost chapter after hers was the start of the 7070 era. So she does have this thing where her 6060 Awakening was the last lost chapter to have that before the 7070 era began. And her rework coming up later on this month for Global. The lost chapter it's tied to is the last lost chapter where you see a double EX weapon banner, because supposedly lost chapters after that is at least a triple EX weapon banner. So she is tied to varying things. Now, she's also part of a list of quote-unquote super synergy for Ultimate Bahamut. And Ultimate Bahamut is the last Ultimate Esper Trial before the 8080 Awakening era begins. So if you see Radia as synergy, you know something is coming along sooner, and it's a bit of a change. So she is a marker character for quite a few reasons. Quistis for Final Fantasy VIII, she is a marker unit. And to reiterate my take on the marker unit, meaning that they're tied to something that's about to end into the era, and not too long later is the beginning of a new era. So the reason why Quistis is here as a marker unit is because when it comes down to her rework and her EX realization, which is coming up later on this month for Global, It's tied to the last character event before the burst LD burst weapon, the LD/burst weapon era begins. So she is her rework and her EX realization is part of an event that's the last one before the LD burst weapon era begins. And believe it or not, when it came down to her lost chapter when it showed up, the character event that came shortly afterwards, which was Rosa, Quistis was the first character who was considered lost chapter synergy. Maybe a bit stretching, but hey, it is what it is. Alisaie from Final Fantasy XIV. She is a marker character because with her lost chapter, which features her first rework, she is getting a second rework soon on Global. With her lost chapter, Alisaie's was really early with her 70/70 awakening. And that's all there you need to know. The thing I will say with Alisaie personally is that her gear tends to be recurring. And she is on the most recent wave of 80/80 awakenings on JP, and that the most recent being the third wave. So she is one of those characters whose gear will be coming back at a pretty frequent rate, if you know what I mean. Maria from Final Fantasy II. Like Lilith said, she is part of the synergy for Act 2, Chapter 11, Part 1, which starts a new thing for the main story, meaning that the main story has each chapter being split into two, instead of one continuous from before. But the thing is with Maria, she is a marker character because of not just that, but we get to a new feature that's coming to Global in the future. You have another change coming along to the Espers, and the first Esper to get their get a new awakening, if you will, to where they can reach level 40, and this particular Esper is Diabolos, is that Maria's actually part of synergy tied to that. Believe it or not. So that's all I really want to say with Maria. So the whole thing with Diabolos, I believe, is Divine World of Illusions. Diabolos is the first one. She is synergy with that particular Esper. Claire Lightning Farron from the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy. She is a marker character, and for a surprising reason. And that is the 80/80 Awakening era, as well as the 70/70 Awakening. So, when it came down to the 70/70 Awakenings, Lightning was one of the very last to get their 70/70 Awakening. However, she is among the very first to get their 80/80 Awakening. And it's when Lightning gets her 80/80 Awakening that she gets her LD and burst weapons. And I'm trying to hold my excitement when I talk about Lightning because, like Radia, she's one of my all-time favorite female characters, and I really do want to meet Allie Hillis in person one day. So and I do, before I pause this video, I do want to warn everybody that this video log is going to be quite a bit longer than usual, so please do forgive me here. Warrior of Light from the original Final Fantasy. Why is he a marker character, Wolfie? Here's the thing, he's one of the first that came along in the game. He was on the first wave of both the 60/60 and the 70/70 Awakening waves. So if you remember this first wave of 60/60, he was part of that wave. The first wave of 70/70, he was part of that wave. And when it came down to EX realizations, he was kind of early there too. Now, I do want to warn everybody that he has yet to get an 80/80 Awakening. However, he does have his LD at Burst in JP. And he's part of Act 2, Chapter 11, Part 2. Sas from Final Fantasy XIII. He is another marker character because, like Warrior Light, he was part of that first wave of the 70/70 Awakenings. However, that's not the only reason why. Well, he's among the very last to get I wouldn't say a rework, but he's among the very last to get his EX weapon. Now, I do want to point out here that with Saz, and I do apologize because I kept on forgetting this particular piece of information, but his EX does come back on another banner, and this particular banner is before his 8080 Awakening. It's around the time where Sephiroth gets his 8080 Awakening, LD, and Burst. So, Saz's gear comes back more than once. So, but like I said, he is among the first to get his 7070 Awakening. He was among the last to get his 6060 Awakening. And I also want to point out here that with his rework coming later on tonight for Global, he's among the very last to get his EX weapon. Raijin for Final Fantasy VIII. Now, like Saz, he's among the very last to get his EX weapon. Although there are other units who have yet to get their rework. However, he's a marker character for that regard of one of the last to get their EX weapon before the LD burst weapon era. However, he shares something with Lightning, and that's being among the very first to get their 8080 Awakening. Kuja for Final Fantasy IX. Now, the thing here is he is a marker character, in my opinion, is because his LD and Burst is part of the very last Ultimate Esper Trial, which is Ultimate Bahamut. And I'm not 100% sure. I heard that there is a Lufenia difficulty with the Ultimate Bahamut. I do have to double check that particular aspect, but with Ultimate Bahamut, it is the final Ultimate Esper Trial before the 8080 era. And he, like I said, he does get his LD and Burst weapon at that point with Ultimate Bahamut. Irba Young Fang from Final Fantasy XIII. Why is she here? Well, with her Lost Chapter, it's the first one that has the following added to it. The Cosmos and Chaos difficulty fights in hard mode. This is where she owns that spot where it's like, hey, only the first Lost Chapter where you actually have to really keep an eye on your ability uses. And that's my worst attempt at an Australian accent ever. But yeah, with her Lost Chapter, it's the first one where you do have the Cosmos and Chaos difficulty fights in it. Lise Hext from Final Fantasy XIV. Why is she here? Well, the thing is with her, the main story is that on Global is the last one where you get 1,000 gems at the very end to complete the, consider to have this completion for the, as part of the ways to complete the main story in hard mode. And I'm trying to words here, but I can't right now. But the thing is with her, with Act 2, Chapter 6, is that she came kind of late. Not to forget that it also brought in the Cosmos and Chaos difficulty co-ops in the main story, which are a limited time. So, and this is also the first main story chapter where the banner tied to it, believe it or not, it had everything like at least EX weapon being realized. Douche for Final Fantasy Type 0. Now, she is an indirect marker character, but the thing is with her, she is tied to the Synergy banner for, I believe, a character coming up where the featured character has everything, in sense of 15, 35, EX, and LD. So she is part of that particular Synergy, and so in that I do refer to Juice as a marker character in that regard. Celeste Share from Final Fantasy VI. For those of you who know me, she's waifu. She's my waifu. And she's also my all-time favorite female character from the entire franchise. Now, for those of you who remember, Ultimate Ifrit was the first Ultimate Esper Trial. She is simply part of that synergy. For that particular, Esper. Setzer Gabbiani for Final Fantasy VI. He is a marker character because when it came down to his particular, the particular Ultimate Esper Trial that he is the star of, which is Ultimate Ramuh, that was the first Ultimate Esper Trial where a 7070 Awakening was featured, and, you know, all that good stuff. And I like Setzer. The Neo for Final Fantasy XIII. Now, the reason why I do feel that she is a marker character is because when it came down to her rework at 7070 Awakening, it was well outside of Awakenings or anything like it. Fortunately, her rework, you know, is pretty damn good. And I do feel that when it came to, when you fully realize her EX weapon 3 out of 3 and MLB it, she has a badass sphere. But like I said, she's probably the only one whose rework was outside of anything. And it was close to introducing the chaos difficulty fight in Ultimate Ifrit, Ultimate Shiva, and Ultimate Robin. And she's actually the star of Ultimate Ifrit. Tifa Lockhart for Final Fantasy VII. She is a marker character for the reason that being part of Ultimate Leviathan, that was the first Ultimate Esper Trial where you actually had the Chaos difficulty fight already in it. And that's just that reason alone. Locke Cole for Final Fantasy VI. Now with him, he was part of Synergy of Act 2, Chapter 5, which was the final chapter where you did not have the Cosmos and Chaos. It was Cosmos and Chaos difficulty fights. It was also the last part of the synergy of the final beta where before the EX realization came about. And when it came down to his 7070 Awakening and rework, he's the only one who got that outside of his own lost chapter. And I also want to point out with Celeste is that she's one of the very few characters is where her awakenings were kind of like, it's kind of odd. And to elaborate here a little bit with Celeste is that her 6060 awakening came with her own lost chapter. Her 7070 awakening came with Locke's lost chapter. And unlike Locke, Celeste does have her 8080 awakening. She is part of Wave 2. And Wave 2 of the 8080 Awakenings, she is joined there by Setzer and Cloud, who I will get to in a minute. Cloud Strife for Final Fantasy VII. Now, the reason why I feel he is a marker character, and to reiterate for those of you who want to pick and choose, things I say is that these characters are tied to the beginning of something or close to the end of something prior. Now, with Cloud here, he seems to be tied to, you know, being among the first of something particular. For him, he was one of the very first to get his EX weapon realized alongside Vincent. And Vincent I will touch base on in a little bit, but he is one of the very first to get his EX weapon realized. His 8080 Awakening is kind of early, so, and that's pretty damn good for somebody like Cloud, in my personal opinion. Vincent Valentine from Final Fantasy VII. Now, with Cloud, he was also among the very first to get his EX weapon realized. It was when he made its debut. Now, the whole thing with Vincent to keep in mind is that he was one of the very first to get his character enhancement boards, because he is considered a sequel main. So, and that is that on that with Vincent. Squall Leonhardt from Final Fantasy VIII. The reason why he is a marker character is that when it comes down to his burst and LD weapons, his is going to be the first that's coming up. That's all I need to say on that regard. I will add, though, that he does get a second rework coming to Global in the future. It was just confirmed on JP, so I'm looking forward to see how his second rework will go. Garland from the original Final Fantasy. With Garland, he is a marker character because his last chapter will be the very first that has pretty much his LD. It also features a burst weapon for a certain character. For Garland, it is going to be Squall. Fran from Final Fantasy XII, she is a marker character because her last chapter is the last that gets a 70/70 awakening, and this is the case for Fran. Porum from Final Fantasy IV. With Porum, her case here is that when it comes down to her lost chapter, it is the first where, believe it or not, you go through a period of time where nobody gets a 70/70 awakening or like whatever awakening of any kind. She is the first of quite a few that goes week or so where you have nobody gaining an awakening of any kind. There may or may not be a chance of a rework for anybody. If for her, in this case, for her last chapter in particular, we saw Yang Long, however you want to pronounce his name. He got his rework and EX weapon with Porum's lost chapter. Aphmo for Final Fantasy XI. With her, she is a marker character because her lost chapter is the last one where a new EX comes to the plate. And in this case, it is Aphmo. The thing is, with her, she is considered by quite a few as a 35 legend, meaning that when they made their debut, their 15 and 35 already made them solid. Campbell Note from Final Fantasy XI. He is a marker character because his lost chapter does see an 80/80 awakening. And in this case, it is Campbell Note himself. I believe this one features Lightning's burst weapon here as well. Ultimisia from Final Fantasy VIII. I feel she is going to be considered a marker character because it comes down to her LD weapon, believe it or not. Her LD weapon, I do feel that is puts her in the sense of a marker character in that regard because her LD weapon does come back. Meaning that if you miss out on her LD weapon when her lost chapter shows up, it should be the second half of August. If you miss it, then you don't have to fret because she does get an 80/80 awakening, and this will mark when her LD weapon comes back alongside her burst. And provided I'm still playing Global when that comes along, you can bet your ass I will be going after her burst as well as her LD. Bartz from Final Fantasy V. He is a marker character because he's the first one to get more than one rework. Meaning that it's like, yeah, you probably get the gist of this. So when it comes down to secondary reworks, it is starting to become slightly more common on JP, but it doesn't happen that often. So he is the first character overall to get a second rework. The last character in this video that I considered a marker character, I did leave a lot of people out. I just didn't want to make this too long of a video, but I just want to point out some of the notable characters that people tend to talk about one way or another. But the last character in my list of marker characters in that made this video is going to be Laguna Loire from Final Fantasy VIII. The reason why he is on this list is that alongside Thancred, he is among the very last whose EX weapon gets realized. Now, unfortunately, with Laguna, the EX realization comes with a secondary rework. But like I said, I do want to point out here that he is among the very last whose EX weapon gets realized. Now, I do want to point out something here and there before I end the video that I didn't want to include every last person, but I just want to point out particular characters who I know for a fact where they're among the very last of one thing, among the very first of something else, or the first where certain things happens outside of the quote-unquote usual circumstances. And like I said, it's just a fun video I just want to do, and this is something that's from pure observation. I will have a link to the Dissidia database website in the description. With that, I'm going to get going because I have stuff to do. Damn it. And with Wolvie here signing off, I will catch you all on the flip side.